Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian, and this month we're doing the first in what's going to be, I expect, a long-running series of monthly Q&A videos. These are entirely due to the generosity of you guys who chose to help contribute to support Forgotten Weapons on Patreon.com. I really can't thank you guys enough. It's going to make a huge difference, and we are more than halfway there to getting enough funding that I can really start doing some traveling and dig up some really awesome stuff in a whole bunch of museums around the world. So I have high hopes for that. In the meantime, I would like to answer some of the specific questions that you guys brought up. Now, there are more than I can get to in one video here without it going for hours and hours and hours. So I'm going to start at the top. We'll take a bunch. If you didn't get your question answered this time, I am keeping them in the queue, and I will try to do it next time. And if you're wondering how to get a question into the pot, well, that is open to folks on Patreon, so $1 a month, and I would be happy to add your question to the list. So let's get right into it. First one I have here is from Robert. It says, the Heckler Koch G11. It started as the darling of the Cold War, was actually operationally fielded briefly, and then ended after German reunification. It was the rifle that was going to change everything, and over the last 25 years it's been a complete evolutionary dead end. How did such a promising rifle of the future turn into an ignominious piece of history? Well, you know, it's funny. The first year I went to SHOT Show, I ended up having breakfast next to an engineer from H&K, and we were chatting briefly. And he told me a joke about the G11. He said when the Berlin Wall came down, the German government was seriously considering the G11. And they, with the fall of the wall, they had a decision to make. They had to choose whether to adopt the G11 or rebuild East Germany. And they chose to rebuild East Germany because it would have been the cheaper option. So obviously that's a bit of hyperbole, but it gets to the core truth, which is that the G11 was an insanely expensive rifle. There are a few pictures out there of one disassembled, and it looks like someone took a Swiss watch and a nuclear bomb and kind of wired them together and stuffed it into a rifle. It is a nightmarish gun. I can only imagine trying to work with something like that in the field. Now, I would love to have the chance to take a look at one in the future. I believe there are a couple in Germany, so possibility is certainly open. I may get to look at one up close myself. Until then, what I can tell you is the gun was expensive. There are fundamental problems with caseless ammunition. I suppose I should go back a step. For the folks who aren't familiar with the G11, it was an experimental H&K produced caseless rifle. Fired a 4.6 millimeter projectile that was encased, literally, in a block of solid ammunition propellant. The idea is there's no brass case, so there's no ejection or extraction half of the firing cycle, meaning that it can fire very, very quickly. And the way it was actually set up was to fire 3-round bursts at some insane rate of fire, something like 3,000 rounds a minute. The idea being by the time you didn't actually feel the recoil or have it affect your aim until all 3 of these bullets had left the barrel, thereby increasing your hit probability. And they had very large magazines because they had very small bullets with little, they didn't have the extra volume of cases either. At any rate, the problems with caseless ammo, which have come up with pretty much every different type of caseless ammo that's been tried, it tends to be fragile, it's harder to transport, it's not waterproof, it tends to be brittle. If you drop a magazine of caseless ammo, you run a good risk of cracking some of the propellants. Because there is no extraction or ejection cycle, if you do have, say, a cracked propellant that jams in the gun, it can be very difficult to clear. They're not really set up for that. It's kind of like having a bullpup, but much worse. A bullpup with no ejection port. That's what it's like to clear a caseless ammunition firearm. There have also been problems with heat transfer. One of the underappreciated functions of the brass case in a firearm is to actually absorb a lot of the heat from the combustion process and chuck it out of the gun. That's why that brass coming out is so hot. If you don't have brass coming out, all that heat stays in the gun, and they tend to overheat that much more quickly. So these are some of the main reasons why caseless rifles haven't worked out so far. They may yet. Someone may come up with a way to make it work. I kind of suspect that will stay a dead end, and we'll see some other technology take over in place of caseless ammo for cool future rifles. All right, second question we have here is from Matthew. Matthew says, which is older in small arms, the detachable magazine or the clip? I'm looking specifically for things that hold cartridges rather than multi-chambered firearms. I'm glad he specified. Of course, before you had magazines or clips, you of course had revolver cylinders, sometimes interchangeable. You also had things like harmonica guns that had detachable ammunition holding elements. However, if we look specifically at the modern box magazine and the modern clip, either the N-block clip or the stripper clip, we will actually find that the box magazine is the older of the two. Box magazine was invented in 1879 by James Paris Lee. The clip was invented by 1885 as the N-block variety by Ferdinand Mannlicher, and in 1889 by the Mausers as the stripper clip variety. All right, our next question is from Mitch. Mitch, I'm going to fix your grammar here a little bit. We're going to say, in one of your recent Facebook posts, I saw you posing with a Japanese mortar, a knee mortar. Will you ever be able to do a live fire video with one of these? The answer is hopefully, and it is possible. Mitch is talking about a Japanese Type 89 knee mortar, which I did a recent video at the James Julia Auction House, which I'll link here, up there somewhere. Very cool little light weapon used from 1929 through 1945. And there are actually, some people did learn from them, and there are weapons like that still being used today. I do know of at least one knee mortar that does get fired, although not with real ammunition. Of course, the projectiles the knee mortar fired were 50mm high explosive grenades. That's legally tricky and also very expensive if you want to be shooting those things off. The ones that I'm aware of, what people do is actually lathe turn projectiles out of something like Lexan or another strong polymer, and then they fit shotgun blank cartridges in the bottom. So the knee mortar is a primer fired, has a hammer and a firing pin, just like or a striker and a firing pin, just like a typical firearm, so you can use a blank cartridge as a propellant charge. And that's the ones I'm aware of that get fired, that's how they do it. So yes, hopefully, if I can start traveling more, I can make it to some of the shoots where those things get used, and I would love to. Next question is from Jacob. This is going to be an easy one, Jacob. Jacob asks, if you were a Union cavalryman in 1865, what would be your preferred carbine? And that is a very easy one. I would go with the Spencer. Now, that is having fired, I don't think, any of the various types of Civil War Union carbines, but having handled quite a bunch of them, the Spencer is really the one repeating carbine that was extremely effective. I would also certainly take an 1860 Henry, although the Spencer was in formal cavalry use far more than the Henry. Next question is from Kenneth. Kenneth says, from what I know, the first recorded examples of firearms use was in China, and this spread to Europe, where all of the firearms development I am aware of took place. Were there any parallel developments in Asia? What was the state of the Chinese firearm industry prior to the end of the Qing dynasty? I have no idea. That is something I will look into, though, and we'll see if we can make that an interesting blog post. Next is from Krideki, I think. Says, I would love to see an episode about World War I aircraft gun technology. Are deflector wedges as crazy an idea as they sound? How does interrupter gear actually work? And was the Foster mount actually a useful way around the problem? So the problem that he is talking about here is the issue of if you mount a machine gun right in front of the cockpit on a World War I aircraft, you will shoot your own propeller off. This is a bad thing. One of the very first solutions to this problem that was developed was by a Frenchman who actually mounted metal angled deflector plates on the back of his aircraft propeller. So he could fire willy-nilly right through the propeller. Bullets that missed the blades, fantastic, might go on to hit an enemy aircraft. The bullets that did hit the blades would hit these metal deflector wedges and not shoot the propeller in half. Not a bad interim solution. It did work, not very elegant, put a lot of wear on the propellers. Definitely inferior to pretty much every other solution out there. But we'll give you points for a good idea. The Foster mount was another idea to a little more elegant, maybe. The idea with the Foster mount was you'd have a biplane, and so your upper wing is actually well above the reach of the propeller. So if you mount a machine gun on the upper wing, you can effectively shoot over the propeller, but you can still aim the aircraft to aim the gun. So the gun's pointing exactly the same place as the aircraft, just displaced a couple feet higher. The problem of putting a machine gun up there is that you have no access to it. At this point, the British were mounting typically Lewis guns, and the Foster mount was a specific type of mount where you would mount a Lewis gun on the upper, point this way, on the upper wing of the aircraft, but then you actually had it on a track, so you could grab a handle and pull it down and back so that you could reload it. The Lewis gun, of course, had this pan magazine on top of the action, so if you can grab the gun up here, pull it down in front of you, change the magazine, push it back up, and continue firing, or also use that sort of accessibility to clear malfunctions, Again, not a bad solution. If it came down to that or deflector blades, I would probably be more comfortable with a Foster mount. Although it did make the gun less accessible for clearing of stoppages and reloading. The best solution, as Kredecki here suggested, was in fact interrupter gear. The concept of an interrupter gear is simple. It is the machine gun doesn't fire if the bullet would hit a propeller blade. Now the tricky bit is how do you mechanically make that happen? The answer was from Anthony Fokker, a Dutchman who came up with this idea first and led actually to a period of significant British or German air superiority as a result. What he did was actually he put a disconnector in the gun that would prevent it from firing, and this disconnector was linked to the camshaft of the engine. So what you would do is calculate where in its arc, if the propeller blade is here when you're firing the gun, when the bullet gets to the propeller will be in front and take a hit. So you figure out exactly where that point is. That's where you set the interrupter gear to disable the gun. So if you were to look at it up close, you would see a regular, standard course of fire of the machine gun, except when the propeller passed in front, the gun would fail to fire until the propeller blade had passed. Now this pretty much only worked on closed bolt guns, which is okay because the Maxim is a closed bolt gun. So it was designed originally for the German aircraft Maxim guns, and it worked fantastically well there. That is the reason you will see specifically closed bolt guns on aircraft, why you don't see things like BARs ever mounted on aircraft. The Shosho was actually originally designed as an aircraft gun, but it was for observers in the back seat. That's where the open bolt guns tended to go, where they didn't have to fire through a propeller. All right, our next question is from Paul. Paul says, not a serious question, we'll do it anyway, but what is the most ridiculous meaning why in the hell would they even think of this as a good idea, firearm that you have ever seen or shot, in terms of mechanical function, disassembly, and purpose it was designed for? That one I have an excellent answer for, and I would say anything and just about everything made by the Cobra company. The Terminator is a particularly egregious example. The Street Sweeper and the Ladies' Home Companion are also excellent examples of why in the hell would you ever think this was a good idea. Well, I'll stick to the Terminator because I think it's the worst of the batch that I've seen from Cobra, yet anyway. If you haven't seen the video, you can go take a look at it up here. If you just want the short version, it is basically a single shot 12 gauge shotgun that is a slam fire design. So it's kind of like half of a blow forward in that you cock it by pulling the barrel forward. You then put a shotgun shell in the chamber, and when you pull the trigger, a giant spring pushes the barrel back onto the shell, which slams it onto a fixed firing pin and fires it. If this were a blow forward automatic design, the barrel would then reciprocate forward and eject, but it's not. It's a single shot design, so the barrel stays right where it is until you depress a locking catch and recock the barrel, thus ejecting the shell. It's a horrible gun. The stock is terrible. The gun is too heavy. And the only reason I can come up with that anybody seems to think that it would be cool to buy, other than as a memento of stupidity, is that it would theoretically be some sort of cool survival shotgun. I really think the people who are thinking of this as a cool survival shotgun are dramatically underestimating the much greater utility of something like an NEF break action shotgun. A single barrel traditional break open shotgun may not be as unusual as a Cobra Terminator, nor may it have as cool of a name, but it is going to be a far more useful shotgun for pretty much anything. So, my nomination for worst gun ever, Cobra Terminator. Next up, we have Rob. Rob is asking, I am wondering what improvements were made to the Owen submachine gun that the Australians used in World War II in Korea to have it replaced by the F1 submachine gun we used in Vietnam. They look very similar. Was it an evolution or a significantly different gun? The answer is it was a significantly different gun. The Owen had a number of features to it that are kind of unique in submachine guns. Most notably, it actually had this two-chamber receiver where the charging handle, and thus the slot in the receiver for it, was segregated from the working parts of the gun by kind of a metal diaphragm almost in the middle of the receiver. This made it a very reliable gun. It was very difficult for sand or mud or debris to get into the working bits of the Owen and jam it up. When the Australians got rid of the Owen and replaced it with the F1, they were doing so largely for cost reasons. The F1 is a significantly cheaper gun to make. It is basically a traditional tube receiver submachine gun. Has a charging handle on the side instead of way at the back like the Owen did. It does have a dust cover and a non-reciprocating charging handle, so on the F1. So they did recognize that that was a good thing, a good way to prevent crap from getting into the gun. Beyond that, the F1 maintains that vertical top-mounted magazine feature that was kind of iconic on the Owen gun. So feeds from the top, ejects out the bottom, and in many ways has the same basic layout as the Owen. But mechanically, the F1 is much more in common with a Sten or other standard blowback tube magazine gun than an Owen. All right, I think we have time for one more. We'll take a slightly off-topic, actually, question from Jacob, because I think this applies to more than a few people. Jacob asks, what gun do I recommend for absolute beginners? I have never even fired a weapon before, and I'm at a loss as to where to start, but I think I would want something more powerful than a 22. I was thinking of Mosin Nagant. Thoughts on anything else? Well, you may not like this one, Jacob, but I would strongly recommend that you do, in fact, start with a 22. The light recoil, the relatively mild noise, although you still ought to wear ear protection with 22s, those things contribute to a much nicer learning environment. They make it a lot easier to really get the basic mechanics down of how do you safely operate a gun. Things that once you've been shooting for a long time are just second nature. Things like maintaining control of the muzzle, knowing where you're pointing the gun at all times, keeping your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot, and then simple marksmanship tasks like sight alignment, like trigger press. All of those things are easier on a 22. In particular, I would recommend a 22 caliber rifle. Easier to shoot, easier to maintain, to safely handle and maintain in a shooting environment. Once you're comfortable with a 22, then yeah, go nuts. Go buy whatever you want. Most Nagants are very popular primarily because of their price. They are not particularly enjoyable guns to shoot. I think they have a fantastic history. I love most Nagants. I have a bunch of them. They're really not a gun I would take out for pleasure shooting compared to a whole lot of others. But what gun is fun to shoot is totally beyond the scope of this question. So, like I said, I would start with a 22. It may feel wimpy. That's not the point. The point is to develop good shooting habits, good safety habits, and that's what a 22 is really excellent for. Well, I think that's about all I have time for today. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you found the questions interesting and the answers also interesting. If I did everything right, hopefully you learned at least something. If you would like to have your question added to the queue for next month's Q&A video, head on over to Patreon. You can sign up and help support Forgotten Weapons for a measly $1 a month, which actually does go a fantastically long way to keeping me in ammunition for shooting and in travel money for going out there and finding other cool guns that I can bring to you guys. So if you did submit a question and I didn't get to it this month, don't worry, I will keep it in the queue and I will do my best to get to everybody's sooner or later. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoy the website and also the video channels.